What if a nation's most feared weapon was secretly a death trap for its own men? In the early days of the Pacific War, Japan unleashed a bomber so advanced it seemed to defy the laws of physics. It could strike from impossible distances, sinking battleships and wiping out entire airfields with terrifying precision. Allied pilots called it the Betty, and they feared it. But soon they would give it other, more sinister names: the flying cigar, the one-shot lighter. They had stumbled upon a dark secret hidden in the bomber EU's design, a secret so shocking it would rewrite their understanding of the enemy. This is the story of the Mitsubishi G4M Betty, an aircraft that was both a masterpiece of engineering and a flying coffin. In the first 6 months of the war, the Betty was an untouchable ghost. On December 8, 1941, just hours after Pearl Harbor, 108 of them appeared over Clark Field in the Philippines. Flying at 20,000 feet, they were beyond the reach of anti-aircraft guns as they systematically erased American air power from the map. In less than an hour, America's prized B-17 flying fortresses were reduced to burning rubble. The Bettys flew away without a scratch, having struck from bases nearly 500 miles away, a range no Allied bomber could dream of matching. 2 days later, they did the unthinkable. Alongside older bombers, Bettys descended on the pride of the British Royal Navy, Force Z. The state-of-the-art battleship HMS Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser HMS Repulse, ships thought to be unsinkable at sea, were swarmed. The Bettys, launching their torpedoes with chilling accuracy, tore open the hulls of the great ships. In less than 2 hours, both warships were at the bottom of the ocean, taking 841 sailors with them. For the first time in history, capital ships at sea had been sunk solely by air power. The Betty had achieved what was once considered impossible, shattering Allied naval dominance in Asia in just 90 minutes. But this reign of terror was built on a fragile assumption, and when that assumption broke, the results were catastrophic. The turning point came in the skies over Guadalcanal in mid-1942. As America flooded the Pacific with new fighters like the Wildcat and the Corsair, Betty crews began reporting disturbing losses. Then, on August 8, 1942, the illusion of invincibility was shattered forever. A formation of 23 Bettys was intercepted on its way to attack American positions. In the brutal fight that followed, 18 of them were shot down. Allied pilots all reported the same bizarre observation. You didn't have to aim for a vital system. A few machine gun rounds anywhere on the wings or fuselage would cause the Betty to erupt into a massive fireball. The nicknames spread like wildfire through Allied squadrons: the Flying Zippo, the one-shot lighter. The once feared bomber was now seen as the most vulnerable target in the sky. Pilots actively hunted them, knowing they were almost guaranteed an easy kill. The mystery deepened. Why was Japan's top bomber, an aircraft of such incredible range and power, so fragile? The answer was waiting inside a captured plane on a dusty airstrip. On January 31, 1945, at Clark Air Base, the very place the Betty began its reign of terror, Major Frank T. McCoy climbed inside an intact G4M bomber abandoned during the American advance. What he found left him speechless. He inspected the wings, searching for the heavy rubber linings of self-sealing fuel tanks, the armor plating, or the fire suppression systems that were standard on every American bomber. But there was nothing. Just a thin 2mm aluminum skin separating thousands of gallons of high-octane fuel from enemy fire. It wasn't battle damage or a field modification. It was the standard design. The implications were staggering. Allied bombers like the B-17 carried hundreds of pounds of armor in self-sealing tanks, which used layers of rubber to automatically plug bullet holes. This technology was heavy, but it was considered absolutely essential for crew survival. Yet here was Japan's premier bomber, produced in the thousands with absolutely no protection for its fuel. The weight savings explained the Betty's incredible range, but it also explained why it burned so easily. It was a death trap by design, But that wasn't even the most shocking part. This wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate choice. To understand why, you have to go back to 1937. The Japanese Navy issued a set of requirements for a new bomber that were, at the time, impossible. They demanded a top speed of nearly 250 miles per hour and a combat range of over 2,300 miles while carrying a torpedo. No bomber in the world could come close. The lead designer, Kiro Honjo, understood the brutal math. To achieve that range, the aircraft needed a massive fuel load. To carry that fuel and still be fast, the plane itself had to be incredibly light. Armor was heavy. Self-sealing tanks were heavy. Fire suppression systems were heavy. Adding the kind of protection American crews took for granted would make meeting the Navy's range requirements impossible. Honjo and his team were faced with an impossible calculation: range or survival. They couldn't have both. Following the strategic assumptions of the time, that wars would be short, that surprise attacks would limit opposition, they made a fateful decision. They sacrificed protection for performance. Every ounce of weight saved by removing safety features was put back into fuel capacity. They had engineered a magnificent aircraft that met every single one of the Navy's demands. They knew it would be vulnerable, but they believed its speed and range would be its armor. They were tragically wrong. The Americans quickly learned to turn this design philosophy into a weapon. On April 18, 1943, U.S. codebreakers intercepted a message detailing the flight plan of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind of Pearl Harbor. He would be flying in a G4M Betty bomber. The U.S. Army Air Forces dispatched P-38 Lightning fighters on a daring, long-range intercept mission, flying hundreds of miles at wave-top height to avoid radar. They knew exactly what they were hunting, and they knew exactly where to shoot. When they spotted Yamamoto's two Betty escorts, the P-38 pilots didn't just attack the planes, they targeted their known weakness. Lieutenant Rex Barber lined up his sights on the lead Betty and fired directly into its wing and engine. Just as the intelligence reports predicted, the bomber instantly erupted in a torrent of flame and smoke, spiraling into the jungle below. Admiral Yamamoto was killed in the crash. The assassination was a stunning intelligence victory, but it was made possible by the Betty's fatal flaw. The unprotected fuel tanks had ensured that once the bomber was hit, there was no chance of survival. The most tragic expression of the Betty's design came late in the war. By 1945, Japan was desperate and had developed a new weapon, the MXY-7 Oka, a piloted rocket-powered suicide bomb. But the Oka had a very short range and had to be carried to its target by a mother ship. The aircraft chosen for this grim task was the G4M Betty. On March 21, 1945, a formation of 18 Bettys, each with a 1,600-pound Oka slung underneath, lumbered towards the American fleet off Okinawa. Already vulnerable, the bombers were now slow, heavy, and unable to maneuver. American radar picked them up from 100 miles away. F-6F Hellcat fighters swarmed the formation long before they could get anywhere near release range. The result was a massacre. One by one, the Bettys, completely helpless, were shot out of the sky, exploding in the signature fireballs that had become their hallmark. Not a single bomber survived. Not a single Oka was launched. The aircraft designed for ultimate range couldn't even survive long enough to deliver its own suicide weapon. It was the ultimate, horrifying failure of a design that had prioritized performance above all else. The Betty's story ends with a final, haunting irony. On August 19, 1945, 4 days after Japan's surrender, 2 G4M bombers departed from a Japanese airfield. But these were different. They were painted bright white, with green crosses replacing the red Hinomaru, circle of the rising sun. Inside were not bombs, but the Japanese delegation on its way to negotiate the formal terms of surrender. The aircraft that had started the war by destroying American forces at Clark Field now served as a vehicle of peace and defeat. American fighters escorted the white Bettys, no longer as enemies to be destroyed, but as symbols of a war that was finally over. The aircraft that had once represented the fearsome reach of the Japanese Empire now carried the message of its submission. The circle was complete. The story of the G4M. Betty is more than just the history of an airplane. It's a tale of two opposing philosophies of war. The Betty wasn't a badly designed aircraft. It was brilliantly designed to do exactly what was asked of it, to fly farther and faster than any other bomber on Earth. But those goals were born from a military doctrine that considered crew survival secondary to mission accomplishment. The unprotected fuel tanks weren't an oversight. They were a calculated risk, a deliberate choice made by men who believed that range was worth more than the lives of the crews. The Allies made the opposite calculation. They built heavier, sometimes slower aircraft, packed with armor and safety systems because they believed a trained crew was an irreplaceable asset. In the end, the nation that valued crew survival built an air force that could endure a long, brutal war of attrition. The nation that accepted catastrophic losses for a temporary advantage built an air force that destroyed itself. The thousands of burning Bettys that fell from the Pacific sky were a testament to that fundamental difference, proving that in war, the machines you build are a reflection of what you value most. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this look into a fascinating piece of aviation history, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. We'll see you in the next one.